We are sending Jen into the heart of darkness in Canada's new defense policy and why we lost the ability to say no to stupid ideas. It's the Line Podcast.
This episode of the Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and increasing regulations, today, nearly 4 million Canadians still smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco, vaping products, and oral smokeless products provide a potentially less harmful choice. Smoke-free alternatives do not involve combustion or burning, like smoking a cigarette does. Instead of heavily restricting access and information about these options, Canada's government should be adopting common-sense legislation that will help further bring down Canada's smoking rates and put information in the hands of Canadians. Information such as the relative risks compared to cigarettes. Because the products are not the same, and they shouldn't be treated the same. It's just common sense. Learn more about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at Unsmoke.ca.
Well, we're tempting fate. Recording this a day early. This is almost a running joke now, Jen, as you know, on the Line Podcast, where every time we record this a day early, something catastrophic happens. But you and I are both traveling this weekend, and then you've got to travel back rapidly because we're sending you to Kananaskis. So hang on, we always put the date marker down. It's June 12th. We should be recording this on June 13th. But why are you going to Kananaskis on Sunday?
Firstly, thank you for saying Kananaskis properly. In Alberta, we say Kananaskis, or K-Country.
Is it like a Toronto thing where no one from here says the second T?
Yeah, well, it's most of our vowels are kind of sloppy here in Alberta, but that's fine. Look, so the G7 is being held. It's a huge international event. There will be probably no end of watchers and drama happening. Mm-hmm. And to have this happening basically an hour from my house is too good an opportunity to pass up. So I decided to go. Look, these things are really, really locked down. As media, I'm probably not going to have an opportunity to interview. Actually, I'll tell you a funny story about that. I'm not going to have an opportunity to sort of interview Donald Trump. That's almost certainly not going to happen. I'll try and hit the media scrums as much as possible, of course, but I'm mostly there for two reasons. One is for color. I want to get a read on the place and a feel for the vibe of the place.
I thought you meant a tan.
Well, there's definitely no tanning happening in Kananaskis in June. And then the second thing that I want to be there for is, you don't want to say this, not when something bad happens, you're gonna want reporters there. Not that I think that anything bad necessarily will. These things are so secure, they're so tight. Matt, do you want to hear a funny story about this?
I would love to hear a funny story.
Can I tell you a funny story about getting my media accreditation for the G7? This is a very Canadian story. Okay. So, but it's another classic example of why Canada no run good. And I'm going to risk pissing off some poor, kind Canadian civil servant, so I'm sorry in advance because I know this wasn't your fault. So there's an online portal. You have to register to attend. Of course, this is where everybody will register from local media to international media. Great, cool. And because this is a really secure event, they want like your ID, you have to do pictures, you have to do the usual gamut of stuff so that they can do a security check on you. For an event like this, completely expected, completely normal. And another thing they asked for was proof of work. So again, this is pretty standard for major events or major organizations. It's like provide 3 copies of a piece of work to show that you're not, Joe Blow's blog kind of thing, right? No, I'm Jen Gerson's blog. Thank you. But anyway, so they wanted 3 examples of proof of work. No problem. Matt, I was given 4 file formats in which I could provide my proof of work.
Okay, so can I ask a clarity question? This is something you have to upload.
Yes.
You're doing an online thing to demonstrate for your credential,
my portfolio,
and they want you to include examples of your work as part of the application.
My work as part of the application.
Okay.
So it's like an online portal. You have to go into the online portal and like upload an actual thing into their system. It's one document and it has to be fewer than 5 megabytes, less than 5 megabytes.
Okay.
We can only submit them in one of 4 file formats. Matt, could you for the audience guess the 4 file formats?
One more clarity question first. Is this for all journalists?
All journalists.
Okay, so the reason I asked that question is because you've got to cover the 3 domains. You got to cover video, audio, and print.
Yeah.
So right. There would be some audio format for radio people.
Okay. Like for example,
a WAV or an MP3 or something.
Okay, sure.
There would be some video format for the TV people. So
MOV, MPEG.
Something, yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And for the writers, PDF or DocX.
Yeah. Okay, that would be pretty reasonable. You're wrong on all 3 fronts.
Okay.
The choices
I mean, I'd like to tell you I'm surprised, but I'm not.
I would like... JPEG was in .jpg. JPEG is in .jpeg. PNG is in .png. And GIF.
GIF.
Now, for those of you who are not familiar with file formats and how they work, those are essentially 3 image formats and the same file format that you use to spread funny memes. So, and it has to be less than 5 megabytes, which is not very big. So if you are, for example, a print reporter who writes
words,
yeah. Matt,
with spelling.
How would you send?
Okay.
How would you send?
If someone were to give me the challenge of demonstrating that I am a print journalist and those were my formats, and you had to send 3 pieces, you said?
3 pieces, yep.
Well, GIF is ridiculous, so I would dismiss that immediately. I'm honestly thinking I would go to like a column I'd written for the Line and screen cap it with my phone.
Okay.
And then I would go to like a Toronto Star column I'd written and screen cap it. And then I would go to a Hill Times or TVO column I'd written and screen. Did it have to be different outlets or was it only 3 pieces?
No, it's just 3 pieces.
Oh, then I would just do 3 in a row from the Line. I would just go to like my columnist tag and go screen cap, screen cap, screen cap, convert them to JPEGs and send them.
Yeah, okay, so here's the problem. You can't screen cap the whole article in one picture, and you can only send the file in one single file of less than 5 megabytes. So I tried taking a picture.
Would the headline
of one
work?
Of my...
Would a headline...
Well, that's what I tried. I was like, I tried taking a picture of my headline. Like, I took a picture of my literal computer screen and uploaded it. And then got this poor civil servant who I'm sorry, because I know that she must have been dealing with like 50 of these identical problems today.
Yeah.
And I was just like, she's like, yeah, that's not proof of work because it's just a picture of the headline in the picture. And I was like, okay, but you don't have PDF as an option, and I can't take multiple pictures of the story because your system doesn't allow it. And like, GIF, what? And I sent her a funny GIF in response. And so it was like, can I just send you the links? And she accepted the links to the piece as acceptable proof of work. So like, thank you, appreciate it. Not trying to sit on you. I know you did not invent the system. I know you did not create it. But like the only other way that I could figure out to try and get, I tried, for example, like taking a PDF of the file and then converting it to JPEG doesn't work because it creates multiple files, not just one. The only other way that I could figure out to meet the requirement would be to physically print out my entire story, lay it down on the floor, and then take one single picture of it. Like take out one picture of the 8 pages.
Of the printout. Yeah.
And if she hadn't accepted my links, that would have to. And like, look, I mean, again, this is like one in a series. Canada no work good.
Yeah.
But the thing I'm just going to point out here, and I know part of the reason why those files are formatted is because, of course, they're probably doing security checks and blah, 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 blah. I don't know what the back-end reasons for why they would do this. But, like, we're running an international level event with international journalists from all over the world.
Imagine the gif Christiane Amanpour sent to get her press pass.
I mean, come on, guys.
When they accepted the links, how, like, was that like a concession, or was that always an option?
I no, it was not an option in the official thing. Like a human being had to reject the thing, send me an email, and ask for the links. And she must have had to have done that to every single media accreditation, because I can't think of, short of photographers, I can't think of a single form of media accreditation for whom that would work. Now, what that actually tells me is that they're actually mostly just expecting photographers.
I was going to say photogs and
fine.
Videographers, right? Because like stand-up
even videographers can't.
No,
do
but a
much
stand-up
on a
TV
GIF.
news reporter could send images of them on the air.
Yes, but it would be like, here's a picture of me on a television screen.
Yeah.
Like, it's not actually proof of work, right? Like it's proof that you were on a television screen. So it doesn't even meet the brief. So anyway, what this actually but what this tells me is that, firstly, most of the media there are just going to be photogs, right? Like, there's not going to be a lot of people doing analysis. And I'm probably not going to get much access to anything anyway. It's fine. I'm not going to be a part of the pool. It's okay. I still think it's worth it for me to show up because it's there. But
it's content. You'll get something out of it.
It's content. Heck, I got something out of even the application process. But to me, it's just one of these classic examples. Like anybody who was designing a system who understood what they were dealing with would have included PDF, MP3. You know what I mean? Like really basic stuff that something disconnected in terms of the people who were designing the system versus the people who were needing the system to do a certain thing, and. This is Canada now. Everything's like this. Everything is like this now. Everything.
I want to give a spoiler to line readers. So it's, like I said before, it's June 12th. And coming up on June 30th, we're going to hit the start of the Canada Day week, which is going to be a Monday, June 30th. The line is going to be closed that week, but we're going to run some canned content. And I'd been kicking around an idea with Jen and some of our other colleagues about what we call the Minor Irritants series. Because at Christmas, we always write the series of articles about things we're grateful for. It's our gratitude series. And I thought it would just be funny to do the Minor Irritants series. I think you found yours. And there's a version of this that I have to put up with, and it's not for work, but my kids are, I live in Toronto, my kids go to school. The Toronto District School Board will like routinely send out updates to parents about upcoming meetings or change in policy or whatever. And one of the things that just drives me nuts about them is, instead of being like, dear parent or guardian, here is a series of paragraphs that relay important information to you. It will be, please see our message about whatever. And it's a link. So you think, oh, okay, I'm going to click the link and then I'm going to go to a TDSB, Toronto District School Board landing page. It will give you the info. But what happens when you click the link is it automatically downloads a PDF. Is this really the best way the Toronto District School Board can communicate? Like, so I'm just like, the easiest thing would be email me the message. The second easiest thing would be email me a link to the message. Instead, what they're doing me is email me a link that I click on that downloads a file that I open on whatever device I'm using to read the message. And I realized this recently, and it was actually for the line, I was looking for something on my phone, and it was a line document. And I had like dozens of TDSB PDFs on my phone, because you click the link and it downloads. And the little issues like this, and I've already chosen what my minor irritant will be if we do go ahead and do this series. Mine's different from yours, but it is the same kind of idea of, why are we stuck using a system that is designed? Like, you know what? I'm going to put it this way. I cannot think of a single defense of this system, right? Because every once in a while, you're forced to jump through a hoop, but you kind of look at it and you go, I understand why they need me to do this. For me, this is something like I'm doing once every 2 years, and it's an irritant. But these people are getting 100 applications a day. They needed to impose some order on the chaos, and you can kind of be sympathetic to that. Every once in a while, you encounter a system that makes no sense whatsoever for any of the participants. And what you're describing to me makes no sense whatsoever. And also, just purely as purely as a confidence in your government matter.
GIF. Nothing says confidence in my government. GIF.
But it's also like, okay, so the purpose, like, let's boil this down to first principles.
Okay.
The purpose of this is to validate people applying for media credentials to an event that will have high-level international VIPs.
Yes.
The Canadian state, and you and I have written a lot about Canadian state capacity issues, we do have security services. I think Jen Gerson should be able to file a pretty standard application form, and some super sergeant somewhere or constable somewhere else or some spook at CSIS gets, hey, here's Jen Gerson's application, spends 15 to 20 seconds online confirming that Jen Gerson is a Canadian journalist, is currently publishing, and that the particulars provided match the application, and goes tick. Because if Ben Merson applied and then puts like a fake image in, puts a bunch of bullshit info, and then the CSIS guys go, we don't have a single file on Ben Merson. Does the Canadian state apparatus need a GIF to prove that you're a journalist who publishes all of her work on the fucking internet?
Now, to be fair, I do expect to run through some additional hoops here because
You'll get there. They'll screen you.
Yeah, they'll do a screen. They'll make sure there's a background check. They'll make sure that I don't have like a rap sheet. They'll do a quick check to make sure I haven't made any threats or whatever.
Have you?
Not serious ones. I mean, come on. The police were never involved.
Yeah.
The police were never called for that.
Yeah.
No. They'll have a general sense of that. And I fully expect that an event like this is going to have more than ordinary levels of that's acceptable and normal. I accept that. But to me, it was just one of those very minor things that makes you go, but wait, do these people actually know what they're doing? Because if they knew what they were doing, they would know that these file formats don't make no sense.
The person you were dealing with knew what they were doing.
100% she did.
The person who designed the process
and was clearly dying inside, just so that I could clear. You know how you could tell when you're getting one of these really polite professional civil servants who is dying inside, but will never say so openly? Like, it was definitely one of those situations.
That's funny.
It was good. Anyway, God. I don't mean that was quite the ramble on a totally petty thing, but to me
but it's not.
But it's not. But it's not a petty thing.
Like,
it is a petty thing, but it's also.
Mitch Heupel in his column published at The Line this week was actually talking about our processes are the problem, and he in his column, Mitch has really cultivated the skill of buttering up his editors because, like, when he sent me that column, he included a positive reference to something I'd recently written. I was like, oh, clever boy. But he was writing in his column about processes like my odyssey to get my birth certificate. And I think one of the points Mitch made, and he's right, is that digitalization or digitization, whatever we want to call it, isn't new. Like, we're not in the era anymore where people were still figuring out if we were going to call it the net or the web. The basic online processes are pretty routine now. And the thing that and again, I don't want to spoil my minor irritants column. The thing that I just find fascinating is that we live in an era where some either websites or apps, or even, I'm actually going to say this, government agencies have gotten really good at digital services. And in the last couple of years, I have had some weird encounters with the government of Ontario. But one of the things I will say that the government of Ontario does really well is online portals. So even when I got sent on that weird multi-week odyssey to get my birth certificate, the part of it that I could handle online was perfect. It was a simple website that had a payment function built right in. It had, when I had to fill out the info, my browser was able to do autocomplete on name, address, all that stuff. Actually punching in the information was incredibly easy. What happens is that when it goes from that thing that works to the actual machinery of somebody digging up the paper record and then having a new copy printed, that part sucks. But you also occasionally will run into, I was running into this recently, I forget which one it was. I was dealing with it was National Defense. It was the Canadian Armed Forces. I had to deal with a Canadian Armed Forces website that was like the original prototype HTML website. This thing was ridiculous in its functionality. You couldn't do anything. It loaded weird. And when you have a good online service experience, or even just a good service from government, I'm grateful for it. But it also drives me insane because you start to realize, guys, it ain't impossible.
Well, the other thing I would notice is that the federal government is getting worse and worse at this every year.
I know.
But the federal government, almost any kind of Canada.ca/website, increasingly you're starting to notice it's superficial. Landing page is superficially nice, but the second you have to go more than one level into anything, you start to realize that we're dealing with 20 and 30-year-old backends and decrepit databases that are totally up to debate and falling apart. And like the actually infrastructure of these websites is falling apart, and you can tell that because these websites have now become so Byzantine they're not navigable anymore, right? The federal government is awful for this, so you know that everybody, and because the deep infrastructure of these websites is falling apart so much, you can just tell that the attempts to build on foundations that are crumbling is leading to these weird problems in places like doing access to information, trying to figure out like previous ATIP requests now, like every single interface that the average Environment Canada, getting down to like the local weather radar now at Environment Canada is not even worth my time. I go to Zoom Earth. You know what I mean? So stuff that was really advanced and cutting edge 15, 20 years ago
hasn't been updated since.
Hasn't been updated, and it's completely unusable now. Anyway, but this is now getting into the weeds of reality of life in Canada. But the federal government's IT infrastructure is clearly falling apart.
You know, it's funny because you're right, it's a government problem, but it's also occasionally a private sector problem. And I'm going to be careful with what I say here because I don't want to give the identity thievers any more help. But I bank with different institutions. The Line, Matt Gurney, Person, some other corporate interests I have. For various reasons, it's not all centralized under one bank. That is an absolutely fascinating ABC real-time experiment in which bank has its shit together. Some of these processes are great. Others, it's like I've got the little Morse code thing and I have to tap out like a blinking sequence of lights to find out what my checking balance is. And the interesting thing is the private sector is generally better incentivized to fix this because someone comes along and goes, we want to spend $1 billion to completely overhaul our IT experience. It's going to take 6 months. We're going to use these vendors, and it's going to actually increase productivity, and we'll make the money back. And the bank goes, okay, that would be a 15-year procurement by the federal government.
Well, the other thing too I would note is like we are the first generation that's running into a problem that future generations will have already solved, and that is the problem of accretion, internet accretion.
Oh, I know.
And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where I mean, like a back end is built in 2001. Functionality is accretes into that back end over multiple different times. Websites get updated, things get moved around, stuff happens, and then before you know it, your entire internet infrastructure is a mess because it's accreted too much weirdness over time, right? Like, and I think we're starting to hit the end of this in a lot of different places where. The internet is now
design.
Yeah, the internet is now old enough that accretion dysfunctionality has become a problem, right? I'm sure there's some kind of technical IT term for this. Anyway, we want to talk about politics. I mean, this is kind of politics.
Can I add one more note though before we move on because it's funny?
All right, go for it.
The U.S. Minuteman missile ICBM arsenal operates off floppy disks.
Yeah, that would be an example of internet accretion, the internet accretion acceleration problem.
Every step in the command decision, radars, fiber optic links, satellites, everything that leads to the communication is kind of as modern as the U.S. military industrial complex can make it. But actually controlling the missiles, it's floppy disks.
I'm not even sure I hate that idea. That's maybe a good thing.
Oh, it has advantages. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So
anyway, look,
politics.
We're gonna talk defense. Do we want to talk defense? Because there were a couple big things this week in politics. One, Michael Sabia.
I wish I knew more about that.
So, I mean, we have something coming
Yeah,
from
we had some
line
piece
about
coming.
Michael Sabiat. The thing that I would note, and other people have made this note, is Michael Sabiat, CEO of a Quebec company.
Yeah,
Thank
correct.
you, my
Pension
brain.
fund or something. Like
A very major Quebec company. This is when we were previously complaining about Mark Carney basically being lipstick on a pig. This is the
didn't
same
have his
dude
own
on the
people.
old team. He didn't bring his own people. That wasn't totally true. There's a couple people he's brought in from the outside, Hodgson among them.
Yep.
But this is really his first big sort of clean house signaling move. And what was really interesting about it was that even conservatives are praising it. They're saying, yeah,
This is
no,
clerk
this
of the
is a
Privy Council,
really
right? He's PCO?
clerk of the Privy Council. That's
Okay.
right. So the former role that was held, well, not last one, but before that was Michael Wernick was probably the guy who made that particular role famous. But this is a very very material signal change that this is a government that's going to hopefully function differently than the previous one was. It's meaningful. It's a meaningful hire, is what I would say. We'll see. But like as I said, it's a promising sign. It's a promising sign that this is actually a serious government that's going to take itself seriously and be able to do that.
Yeah, I would add on the political front, and we talked about this in our dispatch on Sunday. We talked about India being specifically Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, being invited to the G7. And now I forget the specific official, but there'll be a Saudi representative, I think, coming to the G7 as well. And I do, and we wrote this in the dispatch, I do understand the realpolitik of this. I get it. Like, shifting world, Canada's got to be nimble out there. And in general, I've always actually agreed Canada's a little bit too precious. I think we should be more willing to get our hands dirty and wade in the muck a bit on international affairs. But there's 2 points worth making. One of which is that Carney is already running into some internal opposition to this because the Indian issue is divisive within Canada's Indian diaspora. Mm-hmm. And that is a vote-rich bloc that is, I hate that term, but there it is, that is targeted by both conservatives and liberals. So there's a really interesting domestic political angle there. But I also just think I've always wanted Canada to have a realistic foreign policy. I've always wanted Canada to have a realistic defense policy. And both those things include having to sometimes work with bad people. Mm-hmm. But at this point, I'm not sure what Canada's national interests are. And I know what I think they are, what I think they should be. But at this point, I'm not really clear what Mark Carney thinks they are. And I think we can infer some of it from the moves he's making. And to the extent that we can, I'm broadly aboard with it. But I'm just thinking, like, I'm just honestly fascinated here. And I know I'm spitballing, and you might get a better sense of this after you were in the G7. The reason the Saudis and the Indians are controversial invites, I think, is pretty obvious. But Saudi Arabia obviously has a pretty loaded human rights record. But it is also a meaningful broker in the Middle East, and in recent years has been promoting stability, including détente with Israel. So okay, I get it. Where is Canada's balance there? The other issue, of course, is India, because currently Canadian officials, law enforcement, and court systems are in the middle of dealing with what we allege at the highest level was an Indian assassination ring, state-sponsored or directly operated by the Indian state, killing Canadian citizens on Canadian soil. And if you want to make me the argument that we have to deal with these guys, that it's a tough world out there, and we've got to make new friends, and I'm all aboard with that. But is the value of a murdered Canadian now effectively zero? And Mark Carney, he's new on the job. He's going in a lot of directions at once. I'm gonna give him this grace. He doesn't have to tell us today where the moral line, pragmatic even line is for Canada. But he's going to want to get one of his dudes thinking about that. He's going to need to give a speech or something at some point. Because right now, I don't know what our foreign policy stance is.
Well, and to be fair, Canada has sort of been confused on that file for some years now. another thing that came up on my radar is that there was actually an Economist article, which I think has been published by now, but it was an Economist article that has made the claim that essentially Canada and the US are right on the verge of announcing some kind of very major trade deal. This
Trade and
follows on
defense.
some
Yeah.
trade and defense deal. This again follows on gossip that we were hearing in Canada or last week. And there's some more details coming out of it. Some of those details are raising my eyebrow, Matt. Some of those details include things like...
Pardon the interruption, Jen. I'm going to confess, I actually haven't read it, so actually explain it to me from zero. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically among the things that are apparently or reportedly in this trade deal is that we're going to give the Americans first rights to our mineral resources.
Okay.
So the Americans are going to have some kind of first mover privilege in terms of investing in our mineral resources.
I wonder if that paragraph has been translated out of the Ukrainian it was copied from.
Well, right. Now, look, I'm going to withhold judgment till I see what's actually presented. But I don't think Canadians voted for Mark Carney handing over the Ring of Fire. I don't think that after that election, elbows up, the Americans going to own us. 4 weeks later, Americans are moving in to the Ring of Fire en masse. Is going to go over great. That is emphatically not what we voted for here. So, I mean, look, I don't want to rush to conclusions.
It's more hands up than elbows up.
It's more hands up than elbows up, exactly. I'm not suggesting that Carney and the current and our situation isn't difficult. It absolutely is. But I have never seen more social cohesion around the idea of shared sacrifice in the name of sovereignty. And the top line items from this deal look a lot to me like the path to vassalization. And look, maybe there's details in this deal that I can't possibly know what's in the deal yet. It hasn't been presented yet. But this, I actually think, might be shaping up to be Carney's first really, really major mistake. Because I don't think that you can run the election that he ran and then present a trade deal that Trump then goes around saying, look, those weaklings Canadians gave us everything. I am really skeptical about this. I have real concerns about it. Now, that being said, I made this note in last week's dispatch. It seems to me like all of the sources for a lot of these stories are coming from the Americans.
Yeah, I know.
So it's very possible that the Americans are spinning their version of what they expect to be in the deal in order to pressure the Canadians to give them what they want. So I don't know. I'm going to withhold judgment. But who boy, are we going to be paying attention to that one in the next few weeks? And of course, it's going to drop tomorrow because that is our due.
Yeah, I know. Every friggin' time. Whatever. We're gonna have a nice weekend. Come back, talk about defense.
Come back to talk about defense.
All right, we're going to be back in a moment. This is The Line Podcast. We got lots to talk about. Check us out on our website, though, readtheline.ca. If you like what you hear, you're going to like what we write, more or less. Readtheline.ca, sign up for a free account. You'll get a notification every time we publish an article, release a podcast, whatever. And if you sign up for a paid account, we'll love you. You'll be able to leave comments and you'll get some privileged access to some of the stuff we do as well. So check us out. And we will be back in a moment. We're talking about the G7 in the first segment and how secure it's going to be. So you and I, obviously, I mean, you're already going through the screening process. The last thing we want to do now is get you on a more watch list. But let's just state the obvious. Events like this are high profile targets and they require high levels of protection. And there's actually been something interesting in recent years where, I don't know if you remember this, it seems like so long ago now, but actually no, it seems like yesterday, but it was a long time ago. It was the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver. There was a significant Canadian Armed Forces presence there to protect the games from terror attacks or someone kamikazing a commercial jet or something into it. And there's been an interesting trend in recent years, and I think partially it's in response to black bloc style protests, but also partially to make it easier to secure the venues. We stick these things in chateaus in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, let me tell you about trying to find a hotel nearby.
Well, okay, so again, this is my ignorance, but what would the, assuming the G7 wasn't there, are there a lot of hotels? Like, what is Kananaskis?
Well, Kananaskis is the provincial park that's right next to the federal park.
Which
so when
park?
People
Kananaskis?
No, Banff.
Okay, so it's basically Banff.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not. Like here, I'll pull up a map here just so that I can describe it a little bit better. It's close to Banff. So when Americans think of Alberta, they're like, or if they think about it at all, they'll think Banff. What they don't realize is that if you actually live here, you never go to Banff because
Oh yeah.
first it's just a mall in a mountainside. It's not a big deal. Kananaskis. Yeah, so I'll give you a sense of exactly how far Kananaskis Village. Kananaskis Village is a solid. They say. Well, let me just double check here. Kananaskis Village to Banff. I think it's about an hour from Banff, and it is super middle of a park, remote. It can be very effectively locked down in a way that, it's 58 minutes between Banff and Kananaskis.
It's a perfect place to put the leaders of the free world.
Yeah, so it's completely beautiful. Basically, beautiful location, middle of the mountains, very, very remote. As far as I can tell, there's like 2 restaurants. There's Woody's Pub and Patio and Forte.
That's where
nearby.
Macron is staying.
Yeah, exactly. Gorgeous, and there's 1 road in and out. It's totally secure on a bunch of different sides, but there really isn't nobody who isn't a high level member of the delegation is staying in Kananaskis.
Is there a hotel?
There's got to be a hotel where the thing is happening.
Like, where will the prime ministers and presidents actually be? There has to be something there for them to be.
Yeah, I am going to have to figure that out. Yes, there is a hotel. I'm going to have to figure that out practically as a practical matter, because I have to go there. There's a great spa there too. So there's a couple little things of that nature. It can host the event, but the closest place I think we could find a hotel for me was in I think it was Exshaw or Canmore, which was about 30 minutes away. And at that point, you're almost as well off just for me to drive back home to Calgary, right?
Every Albertan is one step removed from Canmore.
Yes, that's right.
Is there any?
Okay, well,
can anyone in Alberta do anything without some point having to go through Canmore?
No, well, yes, but essentially Canmore is okay. So the tourists go to Banff, the locals go to Canmore.
Yeah, I've been to Canmore. I've driven through it a bunch of times, but
it's
just comes
all
up a
roads
lot.
lead to Canmore. Yeah. But anyway, I don't know what point you're trying to make here, but I just went on a rambling discursion there.
No, I enjoyed it. I think the listeners are getting full value of it too. The point I was making was that it is going to be a burden for the military to secure this. And I know that they've had enough runtime to make their preparations for it, and they'll do fine. But the reason I bring this up is because obviously we had a major defense announcement this week. And we're probably lucky that it's such a remote area, and we're also probably lucky that Alberta already has a significant Canadian Armed Forces presence. Large Air Force contingent at Cold Lake and a large Army contingent in Edmonton. So when it's funny, also just a respective glance at our journalism careers. Jen's attitude for the 2025 G7 is, I got to get in there. Matt's attitude in Toronto with the G20 here was, I got to get out. I was not going to be in the city on a summer weekend when everything was locked down. That just seemed like a nightmare. So I've always felt kind of bad about that, because when colleagues of mine were getting arrested because they got swept up in the kettle, I was having a Caesar bar at my cottage. So that was a bit of a different, diverging experience there. But the military is now going to get a huge infusion of cash. And I think it's worth talking about for a minute. And people might have had the opportunity to see my On the Line episode earlier this week with Christian Lupprecht, where we really waded into this. But let's talk about what was announced this week. Let's talk about what it means, and let's talk about what it doesn't mean. So here's a condensed version of that. First of all, what it means is that Canada will hit the 2% NATO target, and it'll hit it almost immediately. There's the money has to be budgeted and flow out the door, but this is not a 5-year timeline anymore. This is, we are going to budget the money and allocate it. That's good. And I think it's 100% signed up with this. I support it. I think Canada hosting the G7 is part of that. Mm-hmm. I think it would have been awkward for the Prime Minister to invite the world here and then explain to them that we are years and years away of living up to our word. I think this is one item that Carney can get off his agenda. And I think
he would also have had to explain it in a JPEG, which is really
or
challenging.
GIF. Yeah, or a JPEG with an E. So this is good. I want to talk a little bit about what the money means or what the number means. First of all, and this is not a complaint, this is not a criticism, some of what we're doing to hit 2% is we're just refiling stuff. So we're going, here are some existing expenses that are already on the books federally that we now deem to be related to national defense. That is part of what's getting our number up towards 2% from around 1.4%. People might think this is me complaining. I'm not. Other countries do this too. Everybody's cooking the books in their own way. The issue to me isn't whether tacking on the Coast Guard and the communication security establishment and some veteran spending should or should not be counted, because it's not a huge amount of money. And even if someone wants to be a stickler on this and go, well, you really shouldn't be counting that, the reality of it is we'll be so close to 2%, I think functionally it's fine. But it wasn't enough to get us all the way there. We actually are going to have to inject new money. And this is where things, I think, start to get interesting. How much money? In constant dollars for this year, over $9 billion. And this is not a one-time injection. This is now, we have raised the floor of defense spending by $9 billion. What are we going to do with it? This is what I think is the absolute best part of Carney's plan. So, Jen, I'm going to tell you something that may or may not shock you. I'm not going to do it in GIF form. The Canadian Armed Forces right now is a paper tiger. There are, like, if you actually look at like our units, if you look at the Wikipedia page for the Canadian Armed Forces, you're like, oh, okay, well, you've got 3 armored regiments, you've got 9 infantry battalions, you've got a dozen heavy warships, and so on and so on. What you're not seeing in that wiki is that less than half our equipment is serviceable. We have not had the money or the manpower to take care of our toys. Most of the units we have are so badly under strength that they couldn't put forces into the field if they had to. And one of the things that's been really, really scary about this, it's kind of a grim metaphor, but you know your medieval history well enough. Even in the famines, they didn't kill all the cattle and sheep. They needed to keep their breeding stock for next year, right?
Yeah. You don't eat the
stock.
Second you're eating your seed stock.
Yeah.
You're basically condemning yourself to.
The Canadian Armed Forces have been eating their seed stock or their cattle stock or their breed stock for a while, because the critical things you need to be able to do to run a military is you need to have deployable forces, and you need to have forces backing up those forces that are generating the next group of deployable forces. And that means training troops, it means recruiting troops and inducting them, and it means taking care of equipment. And we have been forced to basically stop doing some of these things to meet our current commitments of actual operational troops. What Carney is proposing, in theory, is going to address that. It's going to be an infusion of money to get more people into the military. It's going to be higher salaries to keep them in once we get them in. And it's going to be a lot more money for equipment upkeep. I don't know how we're going to get around the manpower problem. I was joking with a friend earlier this week, like you might pull into your local Jiffy Lube and see like a tank there getting a new transmission put into it. I don't know how we're going to do this, but this is the idea. And I think this is great. And this is why I don't want any of you out there accusing me of beating up on Carney here. I am giving this plan a complete thumbs up. This is long overdue. It's massively necessary. And as long as we don't botch it in the execution, fingers crossed, it's going to make a huge difference. Okay, go ahead. No.
Well, you go. Well, who's going to say the K-but first? Is it going to be you or is it going to be me?
I'll do it.
Okay.
I feel like I'm just on a bit of a roll.
I'll make you die inside. It's fine.
K-but.
Okay.
By the time we've spent all this money, and by the time we've cooked the books and done all the budgetary sleight of hand, by the time we've fixed our recruiting system, by the time we've hopefully retained more soldiers, and by the time we've got our equipment serviceable, we're going to have a much better military at the end of that process than we have today. But here's the bad news. We're not going to have enough military. And I think what people don't realize is, and I've talked with you about this, I've put this in columns, I've screamed it into the void on social media. I was talking about this a little bit with Christian, right? Like, you've got to take care of your house. And a few $1,000 every year in basic upkeep it's a pain in the ass when you do it. But if you defer it for 10 years, one day you're getting a $30,000 or $40,000 repair bill. And at the end of spending $30,000 or $40,000, you don't have a nice new kitchen. You don't have a nice new deck. You have the same house you started with before it fell apart. That's where our military is. We have to sink tens of billions of dollars into it to fix what we've got. And the 2% NATO target, Jen, that dates back to 2014. So in, say, 5 years, just I don't know how long it'll actually take, but we'll throw that number out there. Let's say 5 years from now, it'll be 2030. With sustained year-over-year investments that will total tens of billions of dollars, Canada by 2030 will achieve the military it pledged to have in 2014. And to state the obvious, there were things that were happening in 2014 that were worrying. You know, there was Afghanistan, there was the original seizure of Crimea, Middle East is always a tinderbox, so on and so on and so on. But I was thinking about this, just some of the things that have happened in the world between today and 2014. The renewed Russian invasion of Ukraine, constant Chinese activity in the Philippine Sea, the South China Sea, and around Taiwan. October 7th and all of the related activity. What appears to be now, and we are recording this a day early, there's a lot of military hardware moving around the Middle East right now, which makes me nervous. But something that hadn't happened in 2014 that has happened now is that Iran and Israel have directly exchanged blows. We did not have nearly the kind of concern we had about the Arctic in 2014 that we do now. We did not have the Chinese and the Russians partnering on air and sea missions into the Arctic. We did not have India assassinating our citizens on our soil, allegedly. We did not have nearly the spectrum of drone threats, hypersonic threats, or cyber threats. And in 2014, Donald Trump was a reality TV host. So I put that package of events before you, Jen, and I ask yourself, is a 2014 style military right for Canada in 2030?
Okay, but Matt.
Yeah.
How should I say this? The purpose of a thing is what it does.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose of a Canadian military is not to be a functional military for the modern age. The purpose of the Canadian military is to be a place where we put Canadian money so that we can meet the targets we've agreed to, so that our allies won't be mad at us. And if we can put that money away in spending on Canadian businesses, particularly well-connected government businesses and seats in areas that vote Liberal,
Then we did it.
Then that is the purpose of the Canadian military. The purpose of a Canadian military is to be an inefficient jobs works program that meets its targets on paper. And I think that if you're coming into this with an expectation that we're going to have a Canadian military that functions like a military, that's maybe unrealistic.
Are you implying that my expectations may be a problem?
I am in the gentlest way possible, suggesting that perhaps your expectations may be a problem.
Yeah. Okay, so let me grant a lot of that, but let me actually add two other things where I'm still going to be pretty cynical here, but I'm gonna take that level of cynicism. I'm gonna take down just one notch. Okay, one notch.
Okay.
There are two other things that we expect from the Canadian Armed Forces. And I'm with you all the way about it basically being another regional economic opportunity agency. Like, I get it. Every time I think of that term, I hear that friggin' commercial, like from the financial crisis. Like every time there's some like government announcement, we're buying this from a Canadian company, I just hear that jingle in my head. But there are two other things we want the Canadian military to be able to do. And these are things that are not controversial and that I think every government actually understands the military needs to be able to do. One of them is to generate forces for domestic relief operations. Floods, forest fires, old people dying neglected in long-term care homes apparently is a thing that we had happened. So domestic operations are one of them. The other thing that Canada has done is we've optimized our military to generate token symbolic deployments so that we're there. So,
yes, this is part of the allies don't get mad at this brief.
And it's not just the spending target, right? Because there are countries in the world that, and I know I'm stating the obvious here, but there are countries in the world who need their militaries to be militaries because they're either, maybe it's an oppressive regime and they're using the military against their own people, or maybe it's a country that has a real geopolitical threat in their neighborhood or a contested border or something. So their military is to have a military. There are other countries in the world, and the United States is obviously the biggest example of this, where the purpose of their military, when they're not, occupying Los Angeles, is global power projection to sustain government policies, right? Like the Americans had decided, and they seem to be changing their minds about this, that they wanted worldwide power projection to sustain the American order of government. What Canada sort of rationalized our military to be was, well, every year we need to show up at this event. So we need to have enough ships that every year a Canadian ship will do a thing. And, and then every year we got to go to the NATO air police missions. We need enough jets to do that. Every so often we need to intercept some wayward plane over the Arctic. So we need enough fighters to do that. And the problem is, I think it speaks directly to your point a minute ago, which is a thing is what it does. The military has sort of forced itself, and they didn't want to do this, right? But the constraints of budgets and personnel and training are, and on paper, we said the idea of the military was to fight and win battles and protect Canadians and defend our allies, right? But in reality, it was to generate short duration, limited deployment so that we could show the flag. And what we ended up with ultimately was a military that could only do that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the problem here is that we're all getting really hung up on the technical and emotional meaning of the word military.
Mm-hmm.
So hear me out.
Sure.
Instead of saying things like Canadian military, we say the Canadian Emergency Response and Allied Appeasement Force.
Correct. That's basically what we've got.
Yeah, that's right. So stop thinking of it as a military. And just start thinking of it as the Canadian Emergency Response and Ally Appeasement Force Regional Economic Development Program.
You want to know the worst part, though?
Okay.
It can't even do that reliably.
Oh, but that's just Canada. That's implied in the word Canada, Matt. We don't need to make this definition onerous. That's just baked into the word Canada right off the bat. The Canadian Emergency Response Ally Appeasement Force and Regional Economic Development Program more or less covers it off.
When we're off the podcast, we have to figure out what an acronym of that is. You know what? I'm just going to do it right now. Hang on. I'm going to open a tab. Tell me what you want to call it.
The Canadian Emergency Response and Ally Appeasement Force and Regional Development Program.
Oh, you're referring to FARDIP. Now I did include.
You gotta admit.
I did include all the ands, so
they can give themselves an award.
Canadian Emergency Response.
The Canadian Emergency Response and Allied Appeasement Force with a special consideration for economic delivery and process management.
Okay, so I'm deleting the ands. So what we end up with is SURA-F-DIP.
I'm sorry, that's not even the worst acronym in the Canadian stable, man.
Mom, Dad.
I don't know that that's worse than defate.
No. Mom, Dad, I know you wanted me to go to university, but I'm joining SURA-F-DIP.
I'm joining the SURA-F-DIP.
I feel the call to service.
I think a lot of this just becomes more emotionally bearable if you stop using the word military. Just stop.
So you and I both have...
They're just a uniformed division of the Canadian government that take care of wildfires and emergency response homes that occasionally put in something that looks like some soldiers. They are soldiers, and they can do some stuff abroad. And we can get pictures of them, and then our allies will be happy with us and will not be yelling at us at the G7 conference in Kananaskis.
I think I I want to look. Obviously, I'm grokking your humor. I'm here with you, but I do want to make one point out there, which is that there are tens of thousands of men and women in the armed forces who deserve so much better than this because they're warriors. They have answered the call, and I was just thinking about this because
they would like to work for a military.
Yeah, they're desperate
and they deserve to work for a military,
and they're doing their best to do that. And
they're doing their best to function as a military.
And I think I don't want to air too much
surf dip.
Yes, surf dip. I don't.
We have stationed our best men and women and warriors, and we have parked them forever
within the bowels of Seraph Erdip. So you and I'm not trying to air too much of our personal or professional gossip, but I think it's safe to say that both Jen and I have a proven track record of hitting a point where we tell bosses to go get fucked. And we sometimes do it politely, and we sometimes not so politely. In fact, in one of my cases, I think go get fucked might actually have been my opening offering at the meeting.
So I mean, it really was karma and fate that we wound up together.
We deserve each other.
No one would have us.
All of our former bosses can agree that we deserve each other. The reason I say this is like one of the things I've realized about myself. And it's a personal observation. I don't want to bore the listeners with this because I promise this is going to be on topic in a minute. Just let me stare into my navel for a minute, okay?
All right.
One of the things I've realized about myself as a person, and I think it's getting worse as I age, is my tolerance for bullshit and dysfunction is rapidly deteriorating. And if I'm exposed to something that doesn't make sense or it doesn't work well or I feel is burdensome, I'm going to use technical jargon here, I will lose my fucking shit. My mind will blow up. And there's a very nice employee at a federal agency who probably didn't deserve the strip I tore off him recently, except I had just had enough that day. And my emotional reserves were not up to the task of dealing with the incompetency that federal agency was presenting with me. Sorry, I guess Crown Corporation, technically.
Was it the CBC?
No, it wasn't. And I have learned about myself that in order to be sane, when dysfunction hits a certain level, I need to do two things. Number one, leave. Number two, scream at everybody as I'm leaving to explain why I'm leaving. If I only do one or the other things, I don't actually get anywhere. The reason I bring this up as I gaze into my navel, this is either, depending on how you choose to look at this, a really good character trait. This means that I have integrity and I have standards and I articulate my own value. It can also mean that I'm a precious little bitch. Again, using technical language, where I just get to the point where I'm like, I can't put up with this anymore. I'm gone. I'm a diva. I'm out. There are 70,000 people who show up for work every day in the Canadian Armed Forces who have greater reserves of bullshit tolerance and emotional patience than I ever could. I would have rage quit so long ago. I don't, like, we talk about these people as being heroes on the field of battle. They're heroes showing up at the office. And it's not, like, and I'm not trying to say they're all toxic work environments, although there has been a bit of that. Can you imagine every day showing up for work, knowing that your life's vocation is subject to the whims of Canadian defense policy? I can probably think of more frustrating jobs. And they do it all, Jen, and this is, I don't want to get misty here, but these people put up with a level of dysfunction that would have me literally throwing shit. And they put up with it for substandard pay, terrible housing, and the opportunity to be ordered to die. There's, when I was in grade school, and don't worry, this is not too navel-gazing, my grade school, as well as being the regional school, like the local school for my neighborhood, was also for that district of schools. It was the school for children with severe developmental disabilities. I don't mean a little bit of dyslexia. I mean like full-blown incommunicado, in a wheelchair, severe physical and cognitive issues. And the women, and it was all women, who were those teachers. I remember being like very young. I was 7 or 8 years old, and I realized that these people were saints. That there was something in them that let them give and give and give of themselves over and over and over, every day. And I knew when I was like 8 years old, I didn't have that.
Childhood trauma.
For me or them?
Them. That's childhood trauma. No, I'm sorry.
It could be.
You're making a serious.
Well, I was trying to.
I'm an appropriate monster as usual.
I'm not gonna say that, you know, the Princess Patricias are saints, or that the crew of the Ville de Quebec are saints, and I think they'd roll their eyes if I called them that. But they're built of stuff that I'm not, and I really hope that with this extra money we're allocating, they start to actually get some of what they deserve. And I'm not talking medals or parades. I'm just talking about let them be soldiers, let them be sailors, let them be aircrew, let them be what they want to be for a country that needs them to be that. And if it doesn't go well for them, maybe they can all just transition into being special needs teachers.
We're just gonna say that to the men and women of serfdom, we salute you. We see you. You were seen.
We'll be back.
Subscribe.
You know, in the break, Jen and I were talking about how to put surf or dip into a headline, and we can't figure it out.
I don't think it's going to work. I think we need to be a little bit more.
Like, Mr. President, we need to send in surf dip.
It's time to deploy surf dip. I'm seeing now like a chip bowl with dip in it. Surf dip.
Chips and dip.
Chips and dip.
All right. So one of the things we're forced to do, because we're recording this podcast a bit early, is we have to be strategic. We have to be smart. We have to be forward thinking. We have to talk about something that's a little bit timeless, which is why, if anything really huge happens on Friday, it's why you haven't heard us talk about it. Andrew Potter, our colleague here at the line, friend of the line, our go-to daddy, because whenever we need someone to basically break a tie, we trust in him. Long-time writer.
There's only so much you can do with this, Matt. You need to bring in a Gen Xer to rein us in.
Yeah, you've got 2 extra millennials to wrangle. He is former editor-in-chief of the Ottawa Citizen. He's a professor at McGill, and I'm not going to say anything now. I haven't told him before. I think he's one of the best writers in the country. And he wrote a banger of a piece for us this week, and it was about harm reduction. And I'm going to encourage everyone to go to readtheline.ca and read it. But the crux of it, and I think it's a long piece, worth reading, but it's a long piece. So I'm going to try and distill a long piece down into a couple very short sentences. But he talks about how harm reduction began in the 1980s with needle exchange programs because addicts were dying of hepatitis and AIDS. And I shared with Andrew just directly and personally, like a story I know of just personally. Jen, I make this point often. You're not much younger than me, but I don't know how much you remember of the AIDS crisis in the 80s, or if you just weren't.
I'm only a year younger than you, man.
Do you remember at all the AIDS crisis in the 80s?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a little bit. I mean, I had stories about it after the fact.
There was someone in my family circle, not my immediate family, but someone like my family knew, who in the 80s got sick, got real sick, and died astonishingly fast. And it's something like kids today, they're never going to know how horrifying that was and how fast AIDS was HIV AIDS, before we had the retrovirals and stuff.
Particularly if you were in the gay or LGBTQ community or whatever. I have sort of family members who lived through that, and like their entire friend circles just got wiped out.
And before we knew what we were happening, like we know now because we know the science of it, you would have had HIV for a while and it would be destroying your immune system, but you wouldn't know it. But by the time your immune system collapsed to the time you died, could be very brief, horrifyingly brief. And Andrew was writing about how there was this reaction to it at the time, which is we're not going to get gay people to stop having sex, and we're not going to get needle users to stop using intravenous drugs, but we can reduce the burdens. There are things we can do that will bring down the human cost of this. And basically that was the origins of harm reduction. And then what Andrew writes about was how there was a process that happened since, where he basically said eventually society evolved to the point where you don't want to get gay people to stop having sex. We legalized marriage. Like society made huge progress there. There were things that used to be viewed as harms that are no longer viewed as harmful. But there are things where there is still a middle ground. And he was talking about things like sex work. He was talking about things like intravenous drug use. He was talking about abortion as obviously a controversial example. And what he was talking about was how there's now two different ways of viewing harm reduction. One of them is we will never be able to eliminate this societal ill, so let us adopt policies that make it less dreadful. And the example he used for that would be a supervised safe injection site. Then there are things like I'd mentioned, which are no longer viewed as societal ills. Homosexuality, no longer viewed as an ill. It's just a thing. But then he said there were the ones that are debatable, where he said that there are things that we just don't know what the perfect, and I'm quoting him here, what the perfect liberal position is. And he said in those cases, one of the responses of the harm reduction advocates has been almost a perverse libertarianism. Remove all judgment of the state completely. And the state only exists to have the regulatory framework in place to minimize costs. The problem with that, Andrew writes, I think he's right, was that we have almost left ourselves philosophically defenseless in the face of an inability to look at something and go, actually, that's bad. And, you know, Andrew's already made the point, and I've mentioned it here, there is such a thing as social progress. The public view, and polling backs us up on same-sex relations and same-sex marriages compared to 1985, compared to 2025, night and day. And that's good. But what do we think about drug users shooting up in parks? What is the perfect moral position on that issue? And I think what Andrew was writing about, and I think he's right. You and I have spoken, Jen, so often of the pendulum swinging. Harm reduction is going to be one of those areas where the pendulum's going to swing. Whereas
it's already happening. Yeah. That's already coming down. So a conversation that I've been having sort of off and on with you and with the people of our listeners. And also, by the way, I finally kind of have written a column on this theme, which I'm hoping that will come out next week. We'll see what happens with the G7. Is the idea of like, because we are
fingers
so
crossed,
bereft,
G7.
Yeah. Because we are so bereft of the philosophical language that would underpin a real conversation of morality or the kind of philosophical underpinnings of a lot of these things, we revert to like this extreme kind of materialism, morally neutral materialism that I think Matt Potter's trying to get into this point as well.
Yeah.
And I've summed up this problem by saying we are tacking on material solutions to fix spiritual problems. And to me, I read his column and I was like, that is an example of this exact phenomenon.
Yeah.
We're rather than having be willing to have a conversation about this, and I'm not talking about spiritual and religious. People conflate the conversation about spiritual and religious. These are different conversations. You can be spiritual without religious and vice versa, right?
It's almost a cliche, right? I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. But nor is spirituality merely just a conversation about, burning incense and waving a crystal around. Spirituality is a deep conversation about the philosophical underpinnings of what makes you who you are and what you are, and what makes humans who they are and what they are. Do you believe that human life has an inherent value? Is that the way you're going to choose to live your life and conduct your business? What are the philosophical frameworks upon which you build your ethics, and how do your ethics define how you treat people and how you go through the world, and the obligations that you have to yourself and also to the people around you? We are just totally sort of in a post-religious world or in an irreligious world. We are just desperately flailing, looking for the philosophical underpinnings, and finding those philosophical underpinnings absent, are instead trying to cling to what we can actually hold, and that's the material, right? I had a really, really great example of what I'm trying to talk about, but I'm even struggling to explain what I mean, because I myself lack the language and the underpinnings to try and explain this idea.
You need a Jesuit or a rabbi.
I do. We need like a Jesuit and a rabbi here to help me explain this. somebody who's got a better underpinning than I do. I did my best in this column that's coming up, right? I did my best, and I tried to frame this into the conversation around, for example, childbearing, right? We have an uber individualistic, materialistic idea around childbearing. Every individual should be able to have kids or not have kids. Abortion should be fine. Having kids should be fine. But we are just absolutely incapable of framing a conversation around childbearing around the obligations that an individual might have to the perpetuation of a society.
Yeah,
that is anathema.
Yeah, and you're looking
right? Like we can't even begin to have that moral framework, because in order to have that moral framework, there are like 5 levels of assumptions that we haven't even started, that we need to get through first. And the other problem that I think that Potter's piece really brought out for me was what I'm going to call the scourge of the being on the right side of history. And it is a scourge.
Yeah.
Right? This is like people who are looking around saying, I'm going to side, because I lack any internal moral framework, I'm going to sort of place my bets on the side of history, the position on this that I think is most likely to win in the future.
Or even more bluntly, is popular right now.
Or is popular right now.
Yep.
And I'm going to base what I think that's going to be on the trajectory of the last 10, 15, 20 years of policy debates. So because, for example, gay marriage went from being this super contentious thing to totally widely and appropriately accepted, therefore that must be the arc of history we're on. So therefore the progressives are right, and I'm going to take policy positions that are broadly progressive, because recent trends suggest to me that progressive policy positions are going to win the fight in history. That's dumb as fuck. And that's dumb as fuck for a whole bunch of reasons. One being basing your understanding of the direction of history on 10, 15 years worth of data is, whoo boy. Can we expand it out 10, 20,000 years and start from there?
Yeah.
And secondly, it's dumb as fuck because history never ends. There is no end. There is no end to the fight. There is no point at which we won gay marriage, yay, everyone go home. 20 years from now, we might be revisiting those moral arguments and realizing, gay marriage was actually a real fuck up.
Well, did you see just this week, I think it was the Southern Baptist Conference has now adopted as a position that having won on Roe v. Wade, they're now going to seek a federal repeal of gay marriage. Now, I don't think that necessarily goes anywhere automatically, but this is your point. The battle continues.
The battle continues. There is no end to history. There is no final boss. There is no moment when every single moral argument will be forever settled in human society. That's not how any of this works. Human society is like a constant competition of people engaged in struggles of interests and values, and that struggle never stops. Ever. There's no end. There's no finish. There's no finish line. The finish line happens when we're all dead, which could be sooner than later. Count no man happy who is alive.
There's a lot of troops moving around the Middle East. I reiterate, there
you go. But it's stupid to try and peg your moral standards on an idea about, and I think a lot of harm reduction advocates are doing this. They're not going back to first principles on a lot of these ideas because they don't have first principles. Instead, they're looking around saying, I'm on the side that I think is going to win, or I'm on the side of the oppressed in this case, and in this case, the side of the oppressed here are the drug users, and so therefore they're the right people to be siding with, and so therefore I'm going to take on policy positions or strongly position myself with policy positions that are on the side of the people who are disadvantaged or oppressed, and I'm going to plant my flag on that particular hill, and then say, okay, and this is going to be the right side of history because if you look at recent history, the oppressed tend to come out on top, because we're moving toward a more just society. Okay, great, but is that actually the correct thing to do in this circumstance? Is believing in harm reduction actually in the best interest of the oppressed class, or isn't it? Again, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but let's start from there. B, to what extent does that logic take us? I mean, we can have a conversation about harm reduction when we're doing needle exchanges. Please explain to me the harm reduction rationale of vent hoods that allow people to smoke crack. which is not, or smoke methamphetamine, which doesn't actually have the same overdose expenses and doesn't have the same transmission risks? What was the harm reduction rationale of that? And then like this whole sort of, because we've become ungrounded from a first principles based conversation, the assumption that this is the good for the sake of the good expands infinitely outward without any restriction. And it gets propelled by this idea that because history has a kind of history, quote unquote, has a momentum, to oppose this is to be, oh God help you, the equivalent of someone who opposed same-sex marriage in 2005. And you will be quashed by the right side of history.
I think that's correct. And I think when I was reading Potter's piece, and I think you've articulated it well, because you've said we've lost sight of our first principles because we have none. One of the points Potter raised, and I thought it was fascinating, is, and he wasn't saying this in an accusing way, he was honestly just saying, if you look at the totality of official Canadian government policy across a variety of issues, I can't tell you what the Canadian government position is on the value of a life. Because we can see that we have policies that are anti-death. We scrapped capital punishment. We have a healthcare system that attempts to keep people alive. We have public health programs that attempt to prevent death. But also we have, and I'm not trying to wade into the morality of this, but we also have a relatively permissive abortion framework, and we also have euthanasia, medical aid in dying, is the euphemism, as Potter notes. And if you put all these things into a blender and you give them a stir, I don't know what the Canadian government view is on the value of a life. And I think you had said a minute ago that we are substituting materialism for spiritual or philosophical things.
Yeah, if you prefer philosophical, if that word isn't as emotionally loaded for you, let's go with philosophical.
I have no preference. I'm just trying to cover all the bases.
Sure.
Honestly, I would probably rather spiritual, but I know that others won't. What Potter has said, we're also substituting, and I don't think your positions are in conflict, but he says we've substituted medical regulation, where we've basically, and I thought it was really interesting, right? Because one of the arguments that is actually brought up in defense of Canada's abortion system is, no, it's not a total legal void because the medical associations have regulated it for us. Mm-hmm. And that seems to work. Like, I'm not quibbling necessarily with the status quo, but did we do that deliberately?
Well, not only that, and it actually doesn't work in certain circumstances. Like, there are circumstances where you might be late in your pregnancy, discover that the fetus is not to term, and because of the medical regulations, ironically, in recent years, in some cases, women in this situation were sent to the States for abortions, because the medical regulations they're not really comfortable with that. Like, I've had interesting conversations with the heads of abortion clinics who have said, this is nowhere near as permissive as people seem to assume it is, simply because there's no law around it.
Yeah. And I think you and I have both touched on this without engaging with it fully, but one of the things that kind of jumped out at me here, because one of the examples Potter puts in his column is something that I think 95% of people would have no problem saying was bad. And it was a safe injection site that opened in Montreal in like direct proximity to a school. And the students at that school, and there were young kids, were being subjected to, and the two examples that Potter gave was obviously the drug use itself and the immediate physical effects of that, but there were also related behaviors. And Potter noted that kids at the school who were out doing kid things in schoolyards were looking at people masturbating in public, or they were looking at people urinating and defecating in public. And this was all happening in full view of the kids. I would posit that if you put...
Yeah, where's the harm reduction for the children?
Well, that's exactly it, right? And I also think, and the thing that I find interesting, Jen, is you and I have talked about this a lot before. One of the reasons the line exists is because Jen and I, kind of through our independent process of thinking about stuff, had realized that adults weren't adulting. And that there had been a collapse somewhere. And when we talk about the term liberal, we don't mean politically liberal. I'm talking about small L, middle of the political spectrum people who may vote any number of ways. They had lost the self-confidence to say no to things. And I think if you go to 90, like if you polled the Canadian people, should we put a facility that is intended to save lives and probably is going to save lives. But we're going to put it in a location that means school kids will see people masturbating and defecating in public. Is that a good idea? I'm confident you would get 95% of Canadians going, no, that's a bad idea. But we as a society, particularly our liberal segment, that moderating block in the middle of the extremes on the Canadian political spectrum, they couldn't say no. And I think they couldn't say no. And Potter explained it sort of in the way that we've removed all moral judgment from the equation. Jen's explaining it like we've de-emphasized the spiritual, the philosophical. I don't care which one. It's both. It's neither. Like it's a blend of two.
They're different ways of saying the same idea, or trying to articulate an idea that is beyond my ability to articulate because I lack the moral training to try and put in words what I'm trying to say.
How much problems, Jen, do we avoid in recent years if adults had not stopped saying no?
Or adults were secure in their position, their moral position to act and function as adults to say no. I mean, the other thing I would just say is one of the other real casualties of our lack of shared ethic around some of these ideas is we've completely lost the ability to deal with the idea of competing rights on many, many different fronts. It's defaulting to the most oppressed wins, right? The most oppressed is therefore the most oppressed is therefore the good guy is therefore is the winner. That's not actually a defensible position in all cases. Mm-hmm. Adults don't think like that because adults are trained over time not to think in black and white. Adults are comfortable with the idea of gray zones that have to be navigated, again, from first principles. One of the major problems here is that we've lost the ability to say that the children next to the safe consumption site also have rights and we have duties to them as well as the addicts, right? And so how do we balance the rights of those children to exist in their school zone without being exposed to stuff that is way beyond their developmental age to be able to cope with? How do we balance their rights with the duties and cares and rights that are owed to addicts? How do we balance the rights of the criminal who's had a really terrible upbringing beset by oppression and violence? How do we balance his rights and our duty of care to him with the rights of the individuals who might become his next victims?
Or are victims.
Or are his victims. How do we balance the rights of, I'm going to step right on the landmine here. How do we balance the rights of a transgender woman, for example, who absolutely is discriminated against in certain aspects of her life, against the rights of, a teenage female athlete to compete with her peers? How do we balance these rights, recognizing that in all of these cases, there actually isn't a black and white answer. There actually isn't a right or correct or wrong answer.
The last 20 years, we haven't even tried.
And what are the moral frameworks that we are going to use to try and come to a compromise that makes sense? Like we've blown out of the water the idea of balancing of rights, and we've blown out of the water the multiple different kinds of moral frameworks and ethics that we would use to come to reasonable, balanced conclusions about these ideas.
I shouldn't be smiling, and what I'm actually about to share is a very sad story, but it just has an ironic twist that I find amusing because I'm broken. As you well know, Jen, and this it's not as serious an issue as it was in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, but it's still a problem. The Toronto Transit Commission has turned into basically a mental health ward. It's like an auxiliary wing of CAMH. And a couple of years ago, there was an individual, a man, who was on a subway that I was riding, who was screaming violent threats at everybody and stomping up and down the car, getting right in people's faces and screaming at them. And again, I'm of the mind that 95% of voters, if polled, would go, well, that's bad. But I was actually having a conversation with a colleague in the media, very nice person, and I would identify them with affection as a bit of a bleeding heart. And that person was explaining to me it's an unfortunate situation for the people who are on that subway, but that person has the right to live his life as he sees fit and to express himself as he sees fit.
Yeah, how about this? No, he doesn't.
Well, what I said to her, and this is true, I didn't make this up.
You don't have absolute rights to do those things.
Well,
that's nonsense.
There was a delightful twist here, because again, my very progressive friend, heart totally in the right place.
Oh, this is a good story. I can already tell.
I pointed out to her that one of the things that the gentleman was doing was accosting subway riders using vulgar racial slurs. And I could just immediately see her brain lock up, because she was weighing the right of a schizophrenic guy, presumably to live his life and express himself as he wants, against the right of, in this case, it was I felt terrible for them. I went and sat with them. I felt so bad. It was a young couple with young kids, and they were black. And the guy was screaming at them with a term that I think our listeners and viewers will be able to figure out. And he was also saying that they should be sent back to slavery, which, well, I disagreed with. And I went and I sat with them, and I said to them, like, are you okay? And they're like, yeah. They go, we ride the subway every day. It's like not even the first time this has happened, which I thought was sad. But it just kind of occurred to me, that blew my friend's mind, because she didn't know which group, to Jen's perspective, who's the more oppressed group there. And she was nervous about making a decision. But if I had told her it was a train full of white dudes like me getting yelled at, no problem.
And that becomes the problem. So when your moral framework is totally rooted in a kind of intersectional framework, and how should I say this? Certain people have more rights than others depending on where they sit in an oppression hierarchy or matrix. That's going to lead you to some completely, like, sometimes that's worthy in taking into consideration. Sometimes, but it's not the only moral framework that's how shall I say this, necessary to navigating that situation. It's necessary but not sufficient to coming to the right moral answer in that situation. The other thing too is you don't have the right to express yourself without limit in public, no matter who you. No, you don't.
Apparently, if you're roaming a Toronto subway screaming at people, they'd be sent back to slavery.
No.
At least some in Toronto insist. In fact, you do.
How about we impose another ethic on this? You have duties to yourself and to your citizens. Instead of, let's take it out of a rights framework. Let's take it into a duties framework. What duties do we have to that individual, the schizophrenic in this case? What duties do we have to the family who's being accosted? What duties do we have? What duties does the schizophrenic person have? In this case, an adult schizophrenic individual who's screaming in this circumstances, that individual also has duties to his citizens, to his fellow citizens, right? Duties that he is not meeting, right? So,
or is incapable of meeting without help.
That's right, or is incapable. And if he's incapable of meeting without help, then we have a duty.
We have a duty.
We have a duty to respond. So, like I said, a framework that's just only focused on rights and completely ignores conversations around moral duties is also a sort of a morally deficient framework, right? There's a lot of interesting problems. Maybe we should have an ethicist in to talk about these issues. Maybe we should talk about it with Potter. But yeah, I think that his
we're
argument
on a rabbi and a Jesuit.
Yeah, I know exactly. But I think a Potter's piece gets to something that we have lost in our ethic, our sort of collective ethic, in our ability to navigate difficult areas and difficult conversations and difficult gray zones. We've lost something here. We've lost a language. We've lost a moral philosophy that is leading us demonstrably into making decisions that I think most people most of the time know are not defensible decisions on any grounds.
I think that's correct, but I also think, and we can wrap it up here, we've been going for a while, but I can say that there is one other element here just worth mentioning, and I think often of what David Frum wrote years ago, and God, is it ever proving out in real time on the U.S. southern border. He was writing specifically about borders and immigrations, but I think you can punch it up a level, and what David wrote about was that if liberals won't defend the border, the fascists will. And I think if you take that out of the context of the U.S.-Mexican border or immigration in general, even though those are kind of live issues right now, but if you just boil it down to a basic philosophical stance, when when liberals, small L, moderates, whatever you want to call them, decided to not make decisions anymore, they didn't prevent the decision from being made. They put the decision in the hands of other people. And when I talk about small L liberals, I'm including a lot of people who are probably conservative voters and NDP voters in the Canadian context. I would imagine in a broad way, you and I are both small L liberals in that classical Enlightenment.
Yeah.
So if, as a block, if we lost the ability to go, we should not have crackheads jerking off in the school playground, we're not going to stop someone from doing something about that. What we have stopped is our ability to have any input into that decision. It won't be made by us.
Well, and the people who will be making that decision are not going to have nuanced conversations about the nature of duties and rights.
They will not be appearing on the Line podcast.
Yeah.
Or yeah, maybe they will, but we'll see how things go.
We'll see how things go.
Anything else?
Yeah, just you might be surprised where history winds up if you keep on betting on the right side of it.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think was it you I was telling recently about the Bible Code, or was that someone else?
Someone else.
So the Bible Code was this book like 20, 25 years ago.
I remember this. I remember it was the Bible is a cipher that allows us to unlock mysterious treasure and stuff like that.
Yeah, the guy posited a theory, and it was very Nostradamus-y, but if you took the Torah, the Hebrew Torah, and you made it all one unbroken stream of characters, depending on how many layers, like 1 layer, 2 layer, 3 layer, you could start finding crossword style hints where it would predict the future. And scientists at the time said this is statistical nonsense, but the guy probably sold a bajillion copies of the book. I remember picking up that book in a drugstore before a flight and being entertained by it, but also thinking, wow, this is bullshit. But the reason I bring this up is I think that book left me with an almost visceral dislike of anyone who writes a book saying that they have cracked mathematically something that speaks to the human condition. But I've also been reading in recent years, there's the famous book that's been getting a lot of attention, particularly on the far right, called the Fourth Turning. And there was another book, and I can never remember what the hell this thing was called. It was published just a couple of years ago. End Times, I think it was called. But there is this notion basically that because human beings generally don't live to be quite 100 years old, that human history is basically doomed to repeat on roughly 100-year cycles. It's because at a certain...
is this the Ray Dalio? I think it's the Ray Dalio thesis. It's pretty thin.
I know it is.
Historically pretty thin.
But there are
cycles in history.
Yeah.
The problem is that you will never know where you are in that cycle until it's over.
I think the one thing, and again, I'm not trying to Bible code you here, but I become increasingly convinced that if humans lived for 300 years instead of roughly 75, our history would be different. It might just take longer to play out. Maybe nothing would change about the cycles, but they would unfold. And I think, as a trained historian of once upon a time, knowing that things have been tried before and didn't end well is on the one hand a superpower, but on the other hand, it's a completely useless superpower. Because I can look at stuff happening and be like, ooh, that's familiar, but I can't make anyone believe it. And for my friends who honestly believe that they've been on the right side of history.
Well, can I also just make one simple point before we do have to wrap it up? But almost all of the social progress that's occurred in the last 100 years, and I would even go back a little further of that, has been contingent on a period of history that has had no parallel in terms of the degree of technological, population, and economic expansion. So
agricultural expansion.
Yeah. Like we have gone through a 100-year period of history in which human society has never grown faster. It's never been wealthier. And its technological progress has never been more extreme.
And in the developed world, every
there
generation
is
had an almost guaranteed chance of being better off than the previous one.
yeah
Because we hadn't hit the tippy top yet.
The last 100 years of history are completely and totally anomalous. Just absolute exceptional bell curve case way out to lunch. Okay? So all of the social progress that you're lauding or that you're assuming is an unbreakable momentum is rooted in conditions that almost certainly won't be repeated in the coming century. Almost statistically, almost certainly can't be. And then you're assuming what? There's, you see, I don't know if I just explained this correctly here.
No. Like
a lot of the things that have happened, particularly around women's rights, for example, happened in tandem with technological progress and extraordinary material wealth.
Imagine plotting human achievement on average.
Right, sure.
Its curve upward in the recent centuries would generally match the curve in things like crop yields, life expectancy, literacy,
Yes.
GDP. We are probably starting to max out some of the yields on these things. The question then becomes, can social progress uncouple from economic advancement? And especially if economics and political stability retrench, which I think they are, does social progress retrench too? Or have we leveled up to the point where, yeah, things are bad, but my friends Jim and Bob can still get married because they love each other. I don't know how far back things will reset.
Not all social progress will retrench. Like I don't think that is a certainty on any particular file. One of the things I can tell you I'm really nervous about is female empowerment and female progress. Because I think that's going to be one of the first things to get hit when things start to go bad on the economic and political side. That is one of the areas. Like I could see a scenario, for example, where we may continue to make great progress on racial equality, but female equality backtracks and retrenches really quickly.
Yeah, I think yes, but I could also make the opposite argument, and I'm not saying that to disagree with you.
And we're shooting the shit now because we can't predict the future. That's all I'm saying.
Like what I was just thinking, Jen, on that point was I could see increasing female empowerment in increasingly nativist countries. So kind of where it would go the opposite way, right? Where there would be women insisting that we must keep out the hordes of illegal immigrants. And I don't know, I tend to agree with you. I would expect to see women's, it's such a bleak thing to say. I wouldn't be shocked especially in some places, to see women's rights roll back a bit.
Well, I mean, that's already happening. Look at in the States.
Yeah.
Literally, it's already happening.
But I could also see that being channeled into more xenophobic than misogynist.
I don't know what's going to happen. I said, I don't think that you can assume that all social progress is going to roll back in tandem with economic and political retrenchment.
Well, I mean, God, the dark question is, which one gives first? Like, what will be the first right to roll back?
Yeah, do you want to know the one that's going to roll back? The reason why I think it's going to be women's rights, because the demographics are going to collapse.
Because the birth rate sucks.
Because the birth rate's going to collapse.
Yeah, I would add to that.
And I think that's going to be the first thing when people start to realize that their populations not only are not sustainable, but their populations are halving every generation.
Mm. The one that jumps out at me.
You're going to tell me you're going to send all your women to college when your populations are halving every 20 years.
The one that jumps out at me, and I think we might already be in this already, and I don't even think people would object to this. Like, Jen, what you're saying there is pretty bleak. I'm going to lay out.
Oh no, and so I'm not advocating for that.
No, I know.
That's
yeah.
bad.
But there might be a version of it we're seeing already that will be viewed as less bleak. I think we are going to start seeing. I think we're already starting to see more of a return of incarceration for the violently mentally ill, and more punitive and again, like basically like confinement of the violent, criminal, mentally ill or otherwise. Yep. I suspect we have hit or have nearly hit sort of peak bail, peak not criminally responsible.
We've reached a point of our sort of criminal justice ethic or lack thereof has taken us to a place that is no longer sustainable. Like, it can't continue like this.
So that will roll back. So I think when I talked about rights, I could see if we view how we treat the mentally ill today or violent criminals or the ones who are both as a right, I think that's going to roll back, and I think it's already
Yeah.
rolling back.
Well, and the other thing, if I'm looking at women's rights, you want to know where I'm really watching to see how that plays out. Places like China and South Korea. Watch what happens to
Oh, they're a bit
women's
further
rights
ahead of
and
us in the demographic edge.
Yeah, because they're
What about
ahead of us
Japan?
still. Japan, yeah, same thing. So what I mean, these
Well, that's
places
less than
aren't
20
one-to-one
years, though.
compare. Yeah, but I mean, also these places aren't one-to-one comparison because Japan never really had full. I wouldn't.
I hear you.
The rights and roles of women in China are not comparable to the rights and roles that women have in Western, Japan. Japan is a considerably more patriarchal society than ours, is what I'm trying to communicate here. So I don't know if it's comparable, but watch how some of these countries over the next 40 and 50 years deal with a demographic collapse, and watch how that impacts the roles and rights and expectations of women in these countries, because you're looking into the future there.
If our friend Margaret is listening, she should drop us a line.
Yes. Yeah, well, very prescient in many ways.
Okay.
But anyway.
Well, that was fun. That was really uplifting. Anyway, everybody, fingers crossed nothing weird happens Friday that's going to make us look like idiots. But all I can stress again is that we're both getting on planes tomorrow. So we will speak with you soon. We will figure out some kind of a dispatch for this weekend. We'll get that out to you. We got lots of great stuff lined up for Friday and for next week. Visit us at readtheline.ca, sign up for an account, even a free one. You'll get almost everything we produce, and then we'll find ways to induce you gradually to upgrade to a paid. But for right now, folks, thanks for being here. Have an amazing Friday. Have an amazing weekend. Like and subscribe.